At 9:46 on the night of January 18th, 2001, Tara Louise Baker called a friend to make sure she had gotten home safely. Tara was 23. She was a first-year law student at the University of Georgia. She was sitting in the law library on a Thursday night, surrounded by case books. She told her friend she would be leaving in 14 minutes. 13 hours and 34 minutes later, firefighters broke through the door of her apartment at 160 Fawn Drive. The bedroom door was locked from the outside. She had been beaten, stabbed in the neck, strangled with a cord, sexually assaulted. The fire had been deliberate. The only thing missing from her home was her laptop. For the next 23 years, no one knew who came to her door. She was born on January 20th, 1977 in East Point, Georgia. Her parents were Lindsay and Virginia Baker. She had two brothers, Adam and Kevin, and a younger sister, Meredith. Meredith would later say that Tara was the older sister she had always wanted. The family was often described in those years as the perfect little family, 2 boys and 2 girls. Tara graduated from Lovejoy High School in 1995. She enrolled at Georgia College in Milledgeville. She earned 2 bachelor's degrees there, political science and paralegal studies, in 3 years. She graduated cum laude in 1998. She worked as a paralegal at Hancock & Nichols, a firm in Forest Park. Then she worked as a real estate legal assistant at Fortson, Bentley & Griffin in Athens. By the fall of 2000, she had been admitted to the University of Georgia School of Law. The people who knew her described her in a specific way. They said she fought for the people no one else would defend. They said she believed in the application of the law. They said she was fiercely loyal. They called her a champion of justice. They said she spoke up for those society had decided to forget. Her sister Meredith would say years later that Tara had been the older sister she had always wanted. Their brothers, Adam and Kevin, had been her closest companions in childhood. She was one day away from her 24th birthday. The friend she called at 9:46 that night was the last person to speak with her. What happened in the hours after that phone call has never been fully reconstructed. The library closed at midnight. Tara was supposed to leave at 10. She lived a few miles from campus. The drive home took her past Lexington Road into the Deer Park subdivision and to the apartment complex at 160 Fawn Drive. It is not certain whether she arrived alive. Investigators later determined she was killed sometime between 9:45 on the night of January 18th and 11:30 in the morning of January 19th. Almost 14 hours. What happened in those hours has been pieced together only in fragments. She was beaten with blunt force to the head. She was stabbed in the neck with a knife. She was strangled with a cord. The medical examiner found evidence of sexual assault and aggravated sodomy. The injuries showed the attacker had spent an extended period of time inside the apartment. A fire was started. A blanket was taken from the living room. It was placed on the stove and ignited. According to court filings and trial testimony, this happened while Tara was still alive. Then the burning blanket was carried by hand into the bedroom. It was placed on her bed. The bedroom door was closed and locked from the outside. The fire did not spread to the bedroom on its own. It was carried there. Athens-Clarke County firefighters arrived at 11:20 in the morning of January 19th. They had been called for a residential fire. They were not expecting a body. They found her in the bedroom. The blanket was beside her. The arson was not panic. It was method. Fingerprints had been wiped from surfaces. Doors and windows had been tampered with. No usable fingerprints were ever recovered from the knife, from the printer cord, from the stove knobs. The drain had been removed from the bathtub. The only item missing from the apartment was her laptop. What was on it has never been recovered. The first list of persons of interest contained 3 names: a fellow law student, an attorney from a firm where Tara had previously worked, her boyfriend. Investigators interviewed each of them. Investigators interviewed dozens of others. None of the 3 were charged. The rape kit was processed in the spring of 2001. It came back negative. The technology of that year could not produce a usable male DNA profile from the evidence collected. There was no semen detected, no identifiable male DNA. The arson had done what it was meant to do. The fire had destroyed fingerprints. It had destroyed hair samples. It had destroyed possible blood evidence outside the bedroom. The blanket had burned. The stove had burned. The hallway had burned. What remained was a partial scene. The Baker family, in the years that followed, would document what they believed had gone wrong. The crime scene had been contaminated. Communication with the family had broken down. Persons of interest had not been interviewed in a timely manner. Outside investigative help had been declined. Evidence had been handled in ways that the family later argued had compromised what could be tested. Investigators worked the case in waves. Detectives retired. New detectives inherited the file. The file grew thicker. Forensic technology improved. The evidence sat in storage, waiting for science to catch up to it. Within the first year, the case was cold. It would remain cold for 2 more decades. In that time, Tara's mother, Virginia, would call investigators repeatedly. She would not stop asking the same questions. She would not be told the same answers. Every January 19th, the family marked the anniversary in silence. Every January 20th, they marked another birthday she was not present for. 20 years. That is the length of time the Baker family waited for the autopsy report. The official document explaining how their daughter and sister had died was finally released to them on September 19, 2020, 19 years and 8 months after she was killed. By then, Tara would have been 43. Virginia Baker, in those 2 decades, did not stop calling. She called the Athens-Clarke County Police Department. She called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. She kept the file open in her own home. Newspaper clippings, photographs, notes from every meeting she had been able to secure with an investigator. She did not stop asking the question that her statement to the court would later say she had asked thousands of times. In the same year the autopsy was finally released, a former University of Georgia political science student named Cameron J. Harrelson began producing a podcast about the case. He called it Classic City Crime. The series ran 24 episodes between June 2020 and January 2021. He interviewed hundreds of people who had known Tara. Meredith Schroeder, Tara's sister, said something specific about why she agreed to participate. She said Harrelson had treated Tara as a person, not as a case file, not as a body in a burned apartment, as her sister. The podcast pulled the case back into public attention. It also drew the attention of state legislators. In the spring of 2023, Georgia House Bill 88 was introduced. The bill was named, in part, for Tara. The other name on it belonged to Rhonda Coleman, another Georgia woman whose murder in 1990 had remained unsolved for more than 30 years. 2 unsolved cases. 2 families who had refused to stop asking. 1 bill named for both of them. The Coleman-Baker Act was signed into law in the spring of 2023. It allocated more than $5 million to a new cold case unit inside the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It gave the families of homicide victims the right to formally request that an old case be re-examined. It mandated that modern forensic technology be applied to evidence that had been sitting in storage for years. Virginia Baker had pushed for it. So had Cameron J. Harrelson. So had the family of Rhonda Coleman. Governor Kemp signed the bill in Athens with the Baker family present in the room. When the act became law, the GBI cold case unit pulled the evidence from Tara's case from a sealed locker. The rape kit was sent to a private laboratory in California. 22 years had passed since it had last been opened. The kit, when tested in 2001, had shown no usable male DNA. The kit, when tested again, produced a single profile, a single name. Edrick Lamont Faust. He was 48 years old. He lived in Athens, Georgia. He had a long criminal history. Investigators ran his profile through the state and federal databases. The match returned with a statistical confidence that prosecutors would later present in open court. The likelihood of a false match was 1 in 800 quadrillion. Then they pulled his record. In February of 2001, less than 4 weeks after Tara Louise Baker was killed in her apartment, Edrick Faust pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. He had been arrested, booked, processed. He had stood in front of a Georgia judge and entered a plea. He had been incarcerated. For 23 years, the man who killed Tara had never left the system. He had a record. He had a name. He had fingerprints on file. He had been in custody repeatedly in the same county where her body had been found. He had been booked into the same jail. He had appeared in the same court records. In all of those 23 years, no one searched for him. No one had connected him to Fawn Drive, because there was nothing to connect him with. He did not know Tara. He had no relationship to the law school. He had not met her, worked with her, dated her, served her, or crossed her path in any way investigators could find. There was no shared name in their phone records, no shared friends, no shared workplace, no witness who could place them in the same room. The only thing that connected Edrick Lamont Faust to Tara Louise Baker was a kit that had sat in evidence for 22 years before anyone could read what was on it. In May of 2024, he was arrested at his home in Athens. He was charged with 12 felonies: malice murder, felony murder, rape, aggravated sodomy, burglary, arson in the first degree, concealing the death of another, tampering with evidence, possession of a knife during the commission of a felony. 3 further charges. He pleaded not guilty. He maintained from the moment of his arrest that he had never met Tara Baker. The trial began on the 2nd of February 2026. It lasted 2 weeks. Faust did not testify. His attorney, Ahmad Cruz, argued that the prosecution could not prove how Faust had entered the apartment, could not prove how he had left, had no fingerprints from the scene, had no eyewitnesses, had hair samples that did not match a black man. The defense pointed to other people, to Tara's boyfriend, to photographs of injuries on his hands taken in the days after the killing, to unanswered questions from the original investigation, to gaps in the police record, to the absence of fingerprints in the apartment, to witness statements that had been collected in 2001 and never followed up. The prosecution returned to the DNA. They explained the kit. They explained the 2001 test. They explained the 2023 test. They explained what had changed in the science between those years. They explained the number, 1 in 800 quadrillion, and what it meant in a courtroom. They called the forensic scientists who had performed the analysis. They called investigators who had reviewed the original case file. They called witnesses who had known Tara. They called the firefighters who had been the first to enter the apartment. The case was, in the words of one prosecutor, built on a solid foundation. The jury began deliberating on the afternoon of Monday, February 16th. They returned at 1:20 in the afternoon on Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. 12 days short of 25 years and 1 month after Tara Louise Baker had been killed. The verdict was guilty on all 12 counts. Edrick Lamont Faust did not react. 2 days later, Western Circuit Chief Superior Court, Judge Lisa Lott, sentenced Edrick Lamont Faust to 2 consecutive life sentences and an additional 45 years. The judge addressed the defendant directly. She said the evidence at trial had not supported a sentence involving rehabilitation. Tara's mother, Virginia, did not read her statement aloud. She had asked her son-in-law to read it for her. He stood before the court. The statement said her daughter's life had been full of promise and light. It said the man who had taken her had lived in complete opposition to everything she stood for. It said his actions had been selfish, depraved, without compassion or regard for the lives he had destroyed. It said he had not only ended her life and her dreams. It said he had tried to erase her completely by setting the fire. It said the family had not known violent crime before that day. It said the pain was constant, even in moments that should be joyful. Members of Faust's family also addressed the court. They said Edrick was not a monster. They said he had been wrongly convicted. They said justice had not been served. They said they wanted the Baker family to find peace, but they did not believe the man being sentenced had taken it from them. Faust himself maintained, throughout the trial and at the moment of sentencing, that he had never met Tara Baker, that he had no connection to her, that he had never been to her apartment, that he had never been at 160 Fawn Drive. The DNA evidence said otherwise. Tara's case became the first cold case solved under the Coleman-Baker Act, the law named in part for her. The first case the law was used to prove was the case the law was named for. In May of 2003, 2 years and 4 months after she was killed, the University of Georgia School of Law awarded Tara Louise Baker her law degree, posthumously. A scholarship was established in her name. It is given out every year to students who, in the words of those who knew her, fight for the people who otherwise would not be defended. Her name is on a Georgia statute. Her name is on a memorial outside the law school. Her name has been spoken in the state legislature, in a Georgia courtroom, on a Dateline NBC special that ran for 2 hours on national television. Edrick Faust is in a Georgia prison. He will likely die there. 12 counts of guilty, 1 in 800 quadrillion. But Virginia Baker, in the statement her son-in-law read aloud in court, asked a question. She said she had asked it of God. She said she had asked it thousands of times. She said she still had no complete answer. Why her apartment? Why that night? Why the blanket from the living room, carried by hand into the bedroom while she was still alive? Why the door, locked from the outside? Why the time spent inside the apartment after she was dead? Wiping surfaces, removing the drain from the bathtub, tampering with the doors, taking her laptop. The DNA proved who. It cannot prove why. The man who entered her apartment that night did not know her. He has never said why he chose her, or how he found her, or what made him stop at apartment 160 on Fawn Drive on a Thursday in January of 2001. He has never explained how he got in, or how he got out, or why he chose to lock the bedroom door behind him. He maintains 25 years later that he was never there. The science says he was. The reason he was has never been spoken in a courtroom, has never been written into a record, has never appeared in any document, any interview, any trial transcript. The fire was meant to erase her. It did not. But there is something it did take. Whatever the answer was to the question Virginia Baker has asked her God thousands of times, the man who knows it has chosen for 25 years not to speak it. It is still in the room with him. If you enjoy dark mysteries and forbidden history, subscribe to the Black Archive.